Brett Vaughn is here. We are newly involved in the Suboxone lawsuit, and Brett really keyed us into this litigation. It's been very interesting to be part of, but I want to start with Brett. Give us a little background into the science behind the Suboxone drug and what it's trying to do and why that's relevant to us as lawyers.
Yeah, so Suboxone is typically used to treat opioid addiction. It can also be used just to treat people with chronic pain. And as far as the injuries that we're seeing in the science behind it, it's rotting people's teeth out to a very bad degree, teeth falling out. And the science behind it is really simple. It's a very, very acidic drug. And it's a film that resorbs in your mouth, and people are putting it right against their teeth, and they'll even fall asleep with it against their teeth and wake up with kind of chunks of it in their mouth. And it's so acidic that it's just going to rot their teeth out and actually will eat through the enamel of your teeth.
So give us a little view. This is into the background of how a big lawsuit like the Suboxone lawsuit comes about. This product was around for a long time, and it had these detrimental effects. What are you looking for as a lawyer when you're deciding whether or not to get involved in a case like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of things I look at, and this one checks a majority of those boxes. The first one is the science and just how simple is the science and should they have known? Science here, like I was saying, very basic of how acidic this is. And if you're going to keep it against your teeth, you're going to have teeth rotting and stuff like that. Next, I'm going to look at the warnings. What warnings were provided to people about this? There were no warnings at all on this medication about it rotting your teeth. And they were also, early on telling people to brush your teeth while you're taking this medication. That would sound intuitive. You should brush your teeth. And if you're having problems with your teeth, you should brush them. Unfortunately, with this medication, because it was weakening the enamel of your teeth, if you brushed your teeth within an hour of using the medication, you would actually brush the enamel off your teeth. And so I like that about the case too. It's not just a failure to warn, there was a failure to instruct. They do now note that you should be not brushing your teeth for an hour after using it. It's buried in the instructions for use, but they are acknowledging that now. The other things I look into is, regulatory action and other action against the company. And so what kind of kicked this one off was the FDA looked into physician adverse event reports and some studies that were showing that this was linked to tooth decay. And the physicians had sent in very good medical records showing very clearly that people without any problems with their teeth at all within weeks to months or a year were having just severe issues with Suboxone and their teeth just falling out. And so the FDA reviewed a few hundred of those cases and advised them that they needed to update the warning on it. So I view that again as a very strong fact of the case. You don't see that a whole lot where the FDA is doing a full analysis and actually finding a causative association there. So again, that helps the science side of it. And then the other thing I really like about the case is the DOJ has went after the company and the owners multiple times and recovered over about $2 billion for fraud the company was pulling on Medicare for how they were selling this. There's a crazy background story where they were selling, just Suboxone pills initially and making a whole lot of money off of it. And eventually there was going to be a generic Suboxone come on the market, and that was going to just destroy any revenue they were having. Everyone was going to be buying the generic then. They went to the FDA and told them that they didn't think the pill was safe any longer and that too many children were going to be taking, it was going to get diverted to children with because the opioid crisis that was going on and pills. Like, well, kids will take these Suboxone pills easier. So it's not safe. We need to pull it off the market and we need to make this film instead. And the FDA ended up agreeing with them. They pulled the entire thing off. So now they have no generic competition and they have a name brand that they can sell again, which is the film. The DOJ then hit them with deceptive marketing practices. And that's where they ended up having to pay a couple $2 billion. They pled guilty to a felony. And they made them disband their entire marketing team, which is pretty unheard of in the pharmaceutical side. So like I said, this case checks about every box I'd be looking at.
How long has Suboxone been on the market and who makes it?
So the Suboxone film itself is made by Invidor, and that is the company that we are suing. So that would be the main defendant. There's some other Suboxone type films that would have the same ingredient in it, but it's made differently by a different company. So we're not pursuing those. The Suboxone itself has been on the market since like the early 2000s, but that's like the pill form. The film, I believe, came out about 2012 and then went generic in about mid 2018.
And you said this causes damage that affects the teeth, so I'm assuming this is permanent damage.
Permanent damage. We'll see people with dentures. It looks basically, if you've seen pictures of like meth mouth, that's probably the easiest way to describe it, and how a lot of our clients describe it to us, and they're not methamphetamine users. Some clients have no teeth at all left, massive just chunks of their teeth falling off. And then that can also lead to dental infections. So we have seen some clients with very severe oral infections that are in the hospital needing IV antibiotics and stuff like that. It can get pretty severe over time.
What's the percentage of users who are seeing this tooth decay?
That's a good question. We don't know yet. Much, much, much higher than the FDA was aware of. The FDA was talking about, they looked at 200 and some people that had this happen. A large amount of people in the United States are on this medication. It's probably, I think I have it somewhere, but it's probably around 1% or so. It's a lot of people take this medication. There are a lot of people claiming injuries from this. We've already seen 10,000 cases being told or filed, and we know of tens of thousands more out there. We do not know the size of it yet, but it's a significant amount of people.
My question is who qualifies for this lawsuit?
The big hurdle to get over for it is we need to show name brand use by Invidor. And so if you're taking a generic, which if you started after 2018, mid 2018 when it went generic, you're probably on a generic. Most insurance companies aren't going to pay for anything but a generic. And based on prior Supreme Court rulings, we can't sue a generic drug company for failure to warn. They have to have the same warnings as the name brand. So you have to have taken name brand Suboxone. And so that's what we're initially looking for. Once we've signed a client, we need to get pharmacy records and what's called NDC codes to prove who made that specific drug. So that's going to be the biggest hurdle. And then obviously proving the dental damage. And so if someone is, going to the dentist regularly before they started Suboxone, that's going to be easier for us to show, pre and post what happened, but pictures and stuff like that can be helpful as well.
Is there a statute of limitations on this lawsuit?
All claims have statute of limitations. It's a very complex analysis, and it's a question we get from clients a lot, and one that we won't go into depth answering because it is a very in-depth analysis, lots of arguments, and I can't guarantee anybody, that their statute of limitations is or is not viable. But typically there are arguments that we have to keep statute of limitations viable. And so we are pursuing all claims at this time. We think we have arguments to keep it alive.
There's also 50 states, and every state has a different rule about statute of limitations. So to talk about one generic statute of limitations can be overly simplified.
It's very overly simplified. And that's what you will see online. And what a lot of our clients have seen is like, well, I'm in a 2-year state. And it's like, it's not really that simple. You might first look at something and see, it's a 2-year statute of limitations in this state, but then there's things such as discovery rules that could apply. There's other states and their borrowing statutes that could apply. There's all these individual analysis that you have to do in a lot of states based on when the discovery of the injury or the wrong was known. And so it's a very, very, in-depth analysis, and it's not an easy one to explain to someone. And I can't even predict 100% sure, if an SOL is viable or not. It's the argument I'm going to make.
Another question is a lot of people wanted to know if they are filing a claim, if it will impact their current medical treatments.
But it is a good question. And, a lot of times in a pharmaceutical litigation, we expect the client, to quit taking the drug once they know the side effects and, if they would have been warned about it. But I view this one a little bit differently. Like I said, this is a medication used to treat addiction and stuff. And so you are having to weigh the alternative, and just quitting something like that cold turkey could be, worse for you in the short term and cause relapse. And so, anyone that is considering coming off of it needs to talk to their physician, needs to make them aware of their concerns and discuss the alternatives to transition safely to a different medication.
You're intaking cases every single day, and not just this tort, but a bunch of other torts. What can someone expect when they call you up?
It's a pretty basic initial screen on these cases. We're going to be, asking when you started it, why you started the medication, how often you were taking it, if you knew the name of it, if you knew it was generic, if you knew it was name brand, when did you start seeing these effects on your teeth? What were those effects? Did you go to a dentist? What did they do? Which dentist did you see? How often did you go? Stuff like that. When did you quit taking the medication? And when did you learn that this might be associated? That's basically what we're going to be asking. And then it goes for attorney review. If it meets most of the things I was talking about, we'll take the case on, and then we start getting medical records to verify everything. And that can take, several months to get all the medical records that we need.
What's the status of the MDL right now? The MDL, give us a little view of what an MDL kind of looks like in general, and then what you know about where we are here in the Suboxone federal court lawsuit.
An MDL in general is consolidating, in this instance, personal injury cases for pretrial purposes. And what pretrial purposes are is things like getting all the documents from the defendants. There's typically millions and millions of documents we're going to be fighting over, and it can take years to get those. And when we get those documents, that will apply to every single case in the MDL. Same with depositions. So we're taking depositions of very high up corporate witnesses. We can't get them produced for every single lawsuit, but we can, when we get them produced in an MDL, when we take those depositions, it will apply to every single case.
The benefits of the MDL, it makes things a lot more efficient. It allows us to do work in one case that's going to apply to hundreds, or in this case, thousands of cases.
Defense a lot of times will say, if there's one case that what we get out of this massive amount of production, which is going to cost them millions of dollars, isn't really worth it for one case for them. And the judge will a lot of times rule that we don't get all those documents or we don't get all these depositions. But when a company is then being sued by 10,000 people, it shifts that. And we're able to get these documents that we normally wouldn't be able to get from a company. And we're able to depose the very highest level people of that company and then apply it to all the cases. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I would say, of an MDL. Where it's at right now, this is a very new MDL. I mean, it's only been around for about 5-6 months. And so we're still early in the discovery process, arguing about still some pretty basic things. Depositions have not taken place and aren't scheduled to for quite some time.
And then eventually we'll pick some test cases, and maybe it's a case that gets resolved before that. But a lot of MDLs, there's things called bellwether trials, and it gives everybody a chance to see kind of what may happen and lets the defense lawyers learn about the case, lets the plaintiff lawyers learn about the case. And that's actually part of the discovery process.
Yeah, that's an interesting part that you bring up, because when you look at complex litigation and kind of the history of MDLs, it is for pretrial purposes, that I was talking about earlier. And so it confuses a lot of people then, well, if it's for pretrial purposes, why are there these bellwether trials? And that was kind of brought about by the judges that have the right to control an MDL and realize that, once this MDL has went on for years and years with all the discovery, and it's very, very technical, in-depth stuff that we are briefing, if they just instantly remand those back to the federal courts around the United States, those other judges don't have the, years of experience of that litigation, of the nuances, and it can really slow things down on getting those first cases to trial, where the MDL judge understands all the nuances of the litigation, and it can help get to settlement by having those initial bellwether trials and each side seeing where the strengths and weaknesses of their own arguments are. That can typically, help get to resolution before remand is necessary. And so that has become the standard practice in MDLs.
Let's talk about payouts, because everyone always wants to talk about payouts. Is there any indication of what the size of a payout would be for a lawsuit like this?
There's not, and I wish we could give better answers on it. We don't have, any money on the table right now. This is not set up the same way as a class action where everyone's going to get the same amount of money. This is highly individualized because these are personal injury actions. And so, what your injury was, how severe it was, is going to play a part in, what your compensation is. And then a lot of other things will play into it as well, such as various state laws, which we'll see how those play out as the litigation goes, how long you were exposed to it. So the causation aspect of it as well. Were you taking meth and we didn't know about it? And that comes out in the records. That might hurt your case when you were talking about dental damage. And other things that could hurt your teeth could make a difference. How much proof do you have prior to taking it that your teeth were in good shape? When did you start having teeth problem in comparison to when you were on Suboxone? Then, even other Suboxone medications you were taking, a lot of people got transitioned to generics. When did your teeth problems start happening? Lots of things can impact, the analysis of how much someone might get compensated if a settlement is achieved at some point. But we're not at the point of settlement yet, much less understanding how much compensation we're going to be able to get individuals at this time.
What people can think about, the quality of the case against the defendant. And I think what Brett and I believe is the proof is going to be there. This is a case that someone will be able to prove that someone did something wrong. The FDA's come out and said it. And then you're going to have the type of injury we're talking about. And this is a relatively unique type of injury. I've never done a tooth loss case, at an MDL level. But
I don't know anyone that has. So I've asked that question as well when we're talking about values. And it's, again, not one that we have a similar litigation to compare to.
But it's a permanent and consequential damage, something that you can see when you walk into a restaurant. You can see someone, this is what I would say for a lot of the people are really significant visually permanent injuries. So those are the type of injuries that can be worth a lot of money. And we'll see if you can prove the case and the injury is severe, I would expect it to be not an inconsequential amount of money down the road.
Absolutely agree. We wouldn't be doing these cases if we thought it was going to be an inconsequential amount of money. We've tried cases where it's a chronic pain case before, and those are difficult cases because you can't see pain. And so when I saw these cases coming in and saw the photos of the clients, I was in shock. And it's a very, very visible injury. And if you're going to put someone up there on a jury stand, everyone's going to see the injury. It's very apparent.
I think that's the basics of what we have, Brett. We're in the early stages of the Suboxone lawsuit. Any parting kind of words of wisdom for us here?
I think it's going to be, good litigation. I'm glad you guys are hopping in as well. As far as all the clients out there, be patient. These are very long litigations. Anytime you're suing a large pharmaceutical company like this, it is not quick. Even though they've paid the government a lot of money in settlements, that's very different than, personal injury stuff. And I would anticipate this going on for a few years.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.